Hey everybody, welcome to another video review. It's a very special one. I don't do these very often at all because I just simply don't own a lot of these. I'm mainly a statue collector, but I also have a few very rare but very special prop replicas. I just got this in today. So a few kind of things I don't do very often. The first is I'm reviewing something basically the same day I got it in. That's not very common. I usually own these pieces for quite a while. I think about them, I ruminate about them, I put off doing it because I'm lazy, I get distracted, and then oftentimes I finally do like a video review quite a while later, sometimes even years later. So not that common for me to do a video review on something I got immediately. Number two, I'm wearing gloves. I tend to never do that because most of the time I don't think it really matters, or I don't just care. But this is one of the very few situations where I am wearing gloves when I review. There are certain YouTube reviewers who wear gloves as a matter of course when they review anything, like statues, etc. And I respect that, and I probably should do that, but I'm too lazy to do it. But for this particular piece, I make an exception, wear gloves. And then finally, just because of the nature of this collectible, I'm not handheld or doing a handheld video review. Like usually I hold the camera with my left hand, but because I need both hands to sort of like show things off and to handle this piece, and to handle it with some stability. I have this actually, I have my phone actually mounted on a flexible tripod, which I've done before. Usually I do it when I present like puzzle solutions, but again, it's very rare that I would do it for a video review. So again, something that and a lot of things that you're seeing with this video review that I don't typically do. So what exactly is it? Well, it's pretty obvious that it's a lightsaber. The information is right in front of you. But specifically, this is a Master Replicas. Master Replicas Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope Darth Vader prop replica of Darth Vader's lightsaber. And this is the signature edition signed by both James Earl Jones, who voiced Darth Vader, and David Prowse, who played he's the actor who actually played Darth Vader and gave him all of that physical stature and physical menace. So there's a lot to talk about. So buckle in, whether you're ready to have me put you to sleep or whether you're really interested in the history of this collectible and master replicas in general. There's a lot to talk about. So the first thing is I had done a Master Replicas lightsaber review many years ago, right when Star Wars Galaxy's Edge opened in Disneyland. And the reason I had done that review was because I had just built one of their custom lightsabers in Savi's workshop. And that kind of brought my mind to lightsaber, handle replicas. And I turned my mind to Master Replicas. And so I had done one of Darth Vader from Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So if you want to, take a look at that, you can Google it, or maybe I'll put a link to it. I don't typically care enough to advertise my own videos, but DF Chang 813, it's pretty easy search on YouTube. You can see that. And I talked about kind of my feelings about the Master Replicas line versus the newer, items, the so-called legacy lightsaber collectibles from Disney at the time. Now, I mentioned at the time that in addition to the Episode 3 lightsaber, I also owned the Star Wars A New Hope limited edition replica, as well as the signature edition of Vader's lightsaber from Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Master Replicas was a company that was really, really big in the early 2000s, and they got the license for Star Wars. They were one of the first, if not only, high-end prop replica companies to get that license. Before Master Replicas, Icons had it. But Master Replicas could be credited with really going the extra mile and going the extra distance and bring high quality prop replicas to the collector back then. And so they had done a lot of different things: blasters, helmets, thermo detonator, and of course the lightsaber line. And at the time, I owned the signature versions of the Empire Strikes Back and the Return of the Jedi Darth Vader lightsabers, but I did not have the signature edition of the original Star Wars A New Hope lightsaber, which I just got today. Back then even, I got into the game a little bit late because, again, I'm not really a big prop replica collector. And so getting into it a little bit late, these pieces were really going up in value. And I just didn't have the time or the space or the money, to go deep into it. And so I wanted to keep myself relatively self-contained, right? Like, this is like the famous last words of collectors. And those of you who are collectors will know what I'm talking about. You want to try to keep it somewhat contained, not go crazy. And so I decided, I really like these, but I couldn't just go, bonkers buying these. And so I wanted to keep it just really focused. And I decided at the time that something very attainable and very reasonable was just sticking with Darth Vader, one of my favorite characters from the original Star Wars trilogy, the bad guy, the villain. And let's just get his lightsabers. And I did some research, and there's only 4 you have to worry about, right? Episode 3, 4, 5, 6. And I thought it would be really cool to have all of those lightsabers out, and you can kind of compare and contrast and look at the evolution of how the lightsabers began to change. And obviously chronologically it would be episode 4, 5, 6, and then later on episode 3. So that's what I set out to do. And at the time I managed to get episode 5 and 6 signature. And I wasn't necessarily looking for it, but being a collector, of course, you always want the most rare, the most notable version out there, and that would be the signature version. And I think I managed to get them for a reasonable price. Now, this was close to 9 years ago. And at the time, I remember pretty vividly that I managed to obtain a Empire Strikes Back signature edition local meetup cash for about $1,000. I remember that just because I remember that was a lot of money. Like, that was more money. That was the most money I ever spent on a prop replica at the time. And the going rate for a non-signature version of like an Empire Strikes Back lightsaber was actually, like, if it was used, right? Like, not mint in box sealed, but just like a used lightsaber, but still with all the highlights, like you still have the paperwork and a display case. It was like a couple $100. I think an Empire Strikes Back Vader lightsaber limited edition was probably like, in the neighborhood of $300 with the case and everything. So paying almost quadruple price more just for James Earl Jones' signature was, to me, kind of a big deal. So it's stuck in my memory. And then I remember buying the Return of the Jedi Darth Vader signature edition on eBay, and it wasn't like $1,000. I mean, it was up there, but it wasn't $1,000. So that's to give you sort of the neighborhood of the prices that these things were going for, back about 2000, I would say 2012, 2013 neighborhood. And I remember back then, once I obtained, episode 5 and 6, and by the way, I had spent a lot of time just getting Vader sabers. I owned I think I owned episode 3, 4, and 5 limited edition, so non-signature. I own them already, and I own various versions, because if you delve deeply into the history of this prop and master replicas, you'll find that there's a lot of problems, like, the case will come cracked, the mirror will be unacceptably scratched. So there was a lot of, like, I don't want to call it quality control, because maybe the quality control was fine when you first got it. But I like to say there's a lot of attrition, right, in the collecting game of these things, where just over time, people would break them and there would be a lot of damage. And so it was hard finding like a really nice set. And so I would, get the limited edition. Then once I got the signature edition, I would sell the limited edition. So it got kind of complicated. But a part of me always wanted to get signatures of the Revenge of the Sith, as well as the New Hope. And then after doing some research, I realized that the Revenge of the Sith Vader lightsaber never actually came with a signature. They obviously didn't have David Prowse involved. And then on top of that, Hayden Christensen, who actually put himself in the suit, he was Anakin Skywalker, and so I guess it never worked out. So there was never a signature edition of the Revenge of the Sith Vader, which I have already reviewed. Instead, it came with maybe dual plaques to differentiate from a couple of versions where there's only one plaque. So that, was never in the cards. And so then my attention focused on the original Star Wars A New Hope signature edition. Now, you would think that that would be not too bad to get. Number one, because if you look at it, my version here is 673 out of 1,000. So they made 1,000 of these dual signature Vader lightsabers, and they only made 500 for Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So you would think that when you double the number, obviously your expectation is that it would be easier to find or cheaper. But that was not the case. In fact, back at that time when I was looking through eBay listings, a lot of what I found, the price was actually already in the neighborhood of, I think, $1,500. And, at the time, maybe higher. Now, at the time when I thought 1,000 was the limit for Empire, I just could not bring myself to spend $1,500 on, another lightsaber. And in short order, the 1,500 became 2,000. And so I just sort of gave up, essentially, ever getting it. But as with a lot of things, and as with a lot of collectors, as time passed, a part of me, always did sort of yearn for this final piece, because I obviously have 5 and 6, and a part of me just really wanted to finish off and get that, last lightsaber. Now remember, I also have the original, the limited edition. I have the non-signature version of this. And the lightsabers are essentially identical, except for a very, very small detail, but it's a significant detail, which I'll show you later on in the review. But I already own the Star Wars A New Hope limited edition lightsaber, and it just felt like that would just have to be good enough, right, so to speak. But my mind began to turn toward it. 9 years later, earning power is a little bit more, and just through various conversations with friends, watching a few Disney Plus shows, my mind started going back toward these lightsabers. I always displayed them. I always loved them. They're on the mantelpiece of my fireplace in the living room, when you first come into my house. And so I always displayed them for like almost a decade. They've been displayed. But I finally decided to, take the plunge and go for it. And of course, by that time, things had gotten even worse. It gotten from $1,500 to $2,000, and I believe the last auction on eBay was like $4,000, $4K for one of these guys. Granted, in absolutely outstanding condition, essentially unopened and new, but still, $4,000, quite a lot of money. And then while I was even looking, Japanese seller actually put one up for buy it now at $3,300, and it was essentially, he put a best offer, but somebody bought it like immediately. So you now understand that if it's in the 3,000s, any price in the 3,000s for this essentially was now being just snapped up, no questions asked, right? And so I was just thinking maybe this just wasn't meant to be. So what's the story of how I got this? Well, it got complicated because two potential sources kind of revealed themselves to me, right? So there was, I kind of just Googled it on, like, I just Googled it. And when I Googled, it took me to a forum. Nowadays, of course, everything is Facebook, right? But 10, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of business, a lot of secondhand prop selling, statue collectible selling, is still on the forums where, you would read information, listings, you would, type messages to each other. This is like an older version before, Facebook groups became the dominant way of not only sort of discussing your interests, but also buying and selling. And so when I Googled it, it took me to, I think the Rebel Scum. Was it the Rebel Scum? It's the rebelscum.com forums, which is one of the bigger forums for Star Wars collecting out there. And I wasn't a member, but it got me to the prop replica sale section. And I check, because sometimes these forums are like ghost towns, right? They're like ghost towns, and not that many people are actually active on them. You'll look at a post, and some of these posts are from literally 2011, 2013. But under the classifieds, I discovered, to my surprise and happiness, that it was still pretty robust. There were people posting and selling things just literally a month ago, a few weeks ago, and there was flow, of information. People were buying and selling. And normally what they would do is they would put these listings, and it would just be random stuff, there would be a few listings where it would be a very specific one, EFX Luke reveal lightsaber, for instance, right? But a lot of sellers would have multiple things to sell, and so they would just say under the listing, like master MR lightsabers or MR helmets. And I was just kind of clicking along, and there was a seller. His handle was the Antiquarian, and when I checked in there, he was listing lightsabers among other things, but when I looked in, he did indeed have a dual signature Star Wars A New Hope Vader lightsaber for sale for for a pretty high price. I don't want to say it was a ridiculous price, but it was definitely on the higher end, and he had it on sale for about $4,000. And I looked at the history, and that had been listed for quite a few months. And so that was one potential source. But trying to reach out to this gentleman was very tricky, because the only way to actually send him a communication is if I became a member of rebelscum.com. And that was kind of, to be frank, a little bit annoying. I had to create a login and email, and the process just became, for lack of a better word, it became just weird. They at first told me to make up a username, and it could be any username I wanted. Now, bear in mind, I've joined forums, like multiple forums, many, many times, right, over the years. So far, so good. Usually they ask you for a username and a password, and then they will send, and then an email. They will send the email, and then they will send you an email, and you confirm it, and you're in. You're ready to just start posting and communicating. But rebelscum.com had this odd thing where they said that you could come up with any username you wanted, but then later on there was a box that asked you how was your username related to Star Wars. And the one I use across the board, this is my YouTube channel, DFChang813. I just use DFChang813, and I just wrote under the thing I don't have anything my name has nothing to do with Star Wars. It's just my handle I like to use across multiple platforms. And if you can believe it, I did this near the Christmas break, and it took him a few days. Obviously the moderators were busy as well. It was the holidays. It took him about 4 or 5 days, and I wake up one morning to get an email, and they had rejected my application to be a member, which is just ridiculous. And under the reason for rejecting was basically they didn't like my username. They felt, apparently it's a rule for this forum that your username has to be Star Wars related, which is kind of odd, because then why did you say that it could be any username when you asked me to make a username? It kind of confuses things, but then later on you create this other box where you have to fill out why or how your username is related to Star Wars. Even more frustrating, they said just re-register, and make up a new username that's related to Star Wars. The problem, though, is that to register, you need an email. And when you can't re-register, because when you register and you use the same email, the site already has that email, right? You already used the email to create your original username, which they found unacceptable. And so when I tried to do it again, they said, well, this email has already been used. You already have an account. And so I had to actually use another email, make up a username related to Star Wars, and then they approved it. So I mean, sorry if that got a little bit off track, but that just kind of goes to show you how just kind of insane that whole process was and why they decided to do that. I know that part of it is to reduce spam or to prevent, I don't know, hackers or spammers or whatever. But the implementation, in my opinion, was just really not very good. But bottom line is, I get through to this guy, I send him a message, and then it takes him forever to respond because, as it turns out, he's on the other side of the world in Korea. And in case you were wondering, they're like something ridiculous, like 17 hours ahead of us or something. They're like basically a day ahead. And so it's weird. So I send him information. We go back and forth a little bit. It was very, very difficult to just sort of, communicate because, again, we're on opposite sides of the world. So while that's going on, there was another eBay listing of another dual signature Star Wars A New Hope lightsaber. This was on eBay, and guess what? The location was in Rancho Cucamonga. And so that's like literally the city where I live. So that's amazing, right? Because if that's the case, I'm going to be able to inspect the lightsaber in person. We might be able to make a deal. I can give him cash because we don't have to deal with eBay or PayPal because obviously it's person to person. So I reach out to that gentleman to see if I can actually visit and check it out. So both things are occurring simultaneously. So I actually managed to go to the Rancho Cucamonga lightsaber first. We set up a time. I go there and I see the lightsaber. And at the time, his listing was $3,000 or best offer, right? And the reason for that was because it was not complete in the typical sense that he didn't have the brown shipper, and he had the important paperwork, had the certificate of authenticity, but not like everything. And he didn't have the packaging for the display case and things like that. But he did have the lightsaber, the plaques, as well as the box for the lightsaber with the blue velvet, cutout, right? The velvet, the velvet box in essence, the box with the velvet interior. So on the eBay pics, I could already tell that there were some problems. Like there were some problems in Paradise. There were some problems with the case and the mirror. I knew that there was a crack in the case and that the mirror was pretty badly scratched. I thought on one of the pictures of the lightsaber that there was a little bit of a chip somewhere on the saber. So when I went to it in person, I saw it in person, and what I discovered is that he definitely had both plaques, but they were very, very, very badly tarnished, which I was like, okay, I can probably deal with that. There are ways to polish it out and make it really look good. We'll get back to that in a second. But there was a huge crack in the acrylic case, making it just not very good. And the mirror base was just a disaster, heavily, heavily scratched. I looked at the lightsaber. It was generally in good condition, but sadly, I'm gonna move this back a little bit, but sadly, over here, I don't even know what this is called, but in this area here near the emitter, the tip of the flocking had been chipped in 2 or 3 places, about a millimeter and each one a millimeter, and there was one spot that was like 2 to 3 millimeters. It was like a little chip where the black was chipped away. Okay, and so unfortunately, that was definitely not a mint lightsaber. and the condition was far from what you would want. And for 3,000 or best offer, it was tough. So I backed off of that because I didn't really want to have such damaged goods. I would have to get a new case, new mirror base. It would just be very complicated, and I didn't want to really get into that. But to be honest with you, if I was to offer him a price, I would have had a hard time offering anything above $1,500 for that, because again, completely trashed case, trashed base, badly tarnished plaques, and the lightsaber itself was damaged. Not badly damaged, but damaged nonetheless. And so I had to say no to that. And then the rebelscum.com connection activated. We talked it out. We bargained a little bit. It went very, very quickly because, again, there's only so many of these out there at one time. And so multiple buyers are looking at the same, opportunities. And so we came to a reasonable sort of compromise based on the current listings. And at that time, I guess I was just very lucky that shortly after the $4,000 eBay listing, there was the other listing from Japan that was only $3,300, and then there was that guy in Rancho who was asking $3,000 or best offer. And so between all of that information going on, the fees on eBay, saving the fees, all of these things going on, we managed to come to a compromise of $3,250, including out the door, including shipping from Korea. That's, so that's not cheap, especially if you're going to ship priority mail. This doesn't look that big, but remember, it has to come with the base and the display case, and that all has to be packaged. So the box is not insignificant, and when you're shipping it and insuring it internationally, that's not exactly, very cheap. And also another sort of deal breaker is that I had to pay bank transfer, so no fees, right? Because you add fees. And so I actually I had to basically trust him, some guy I just met on the forums, with $3,000+ essentially, as a gift, no take back. There had to be some blind trust. But this is sort of the things you have to do if you're going to get your hands on one of these, something like this in 2022, 2023. Luckily, it worked out. He's a very high-end collector. I took a leap of faith. We messaged. I felt good about him. And he came through for me, packaged it very, very nicely. He sent it out on Thursday, Korea time. It got to me Monday, North American time. So very, very quick. If you take out the weekend, it was basically 2 to 3 days. So finally, after waiting the better part of a decade, I finally have the Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope Darth Vader dual signature lightsaber in all its glory in front of me, from Master Replicas. Okay. And before getting into the details of this, Master Replicas has this kind of very storied history. They really revolutionized prop replicas. Like I said before, they went in there, they scanned the props. They really went above and beyond. Their quality was very, very high. These are not toys. It's just basically a whole nother level above what is currently being offered as legacy props from Disney in Disney's Galaxy's Edge, which that's actually beginning to rise in value as well, to show you sort of the hunger of Star Wars collectors. But this is another level above, and they would have these versions, right? So they would always have a version. And if that's like the one maybe criticism in a sense, is that they had maybe too many separate things, and it confuses the collecting. They would have the limited edition versus the signature edition. Then they introduced a so-called Elite Edition, which is a prop replica made of very, very high quality materials. And then they will have, a edition that comes with that comes with the display case and the mirrored base, and then there will be a version that didn't. So that really sort of kind of confuses things, it clouds things. And that can sometimes hurt collecting in the aftermarket because you just don't know what the heck is going on and whatnot. So obviously the signature versions are always a little bit more desirable because it actually has a signature of the actors involved, which is like a really cool thing. Master Replicas set themselves apart by actually giving you the display case and the mirrored base, which is very classy. Near the end of their life cycle, sadly, they were not able to continue doing that. And then EFX, which actually had some of the same employees, I think, even though it was a different company, some people went to EFX EFX was trying to, take over the vacuum created by Master Replicas, going out of business or getting away from or losing the license. But EFX was never able to replicate the wide breadth of work that was done, the quality that was done, and they didn't have a display cabinet, the display acrylic display case, the cover. So a lot of props, pun intended, to Master Replicas for the work they do, and their stuff is still very highly sought after because of the original they had the credibility of the well-known actors lending their signatures, and for the quality of their work that's still very, very highly sought after in today's market. All these pieces are now over 20 years old, but still holding value, still in the world of Star Wars collecting, extremely, extremely sought after. And I do feel kind of sad that Master Replicas in the end sort of petered out. They weren't able to quite do everything they wanted to do. One of their higher level guys, one of the head guys, Steve Dimzo, later on got into a little bit of trouble on the replica prop forums. He had done a few things and had put forward a few projects, taking some people's money as deposits and never was able to deliver. And that actually kind of hurt his reputation quite a bit. And it was a tough time. I mean, I think the prop and replica was from Men in Black. It was a neuralizer, and he had taken a lot of deposit, a lot of money, and that project was never done. And it got a little bit, ugly there at the RPF forums. This was many, many years ago. So, this company, in the end, and some of the people associated with it did not end super, super well. I mean, there's that history there. And Master Replicas as a company has never been replaced. Maybe the reason for this is because now Disney owns the license, and they're very, very, very picky about what they are going to allow licensing and how it's going to be done, and they don't want anything to compete. Star Wars collectibles are like a gold mine, and so your question is, why would Disney be so, stingy about handing out the license? I mean, certainly, as far as the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the MCU, licenses are being handed out. I mean, you have Queen Studios, you've got Sideshow, you have movie licenses out there, Iron Studios. They're out there. You've got life-size Iron Man busts. Then why not Star Wars? It's obvious. Why not the lightsabers? And yet all we have are basically like kind of, I don't mean disrespect by saying it, but in my opinion, we have glorified high-end toys, which is what these legacy collectibles are from Galaxy's Edge. They're toys. They're somewhat limited, but they're very large, ungainly. They have to be big enough to put the lightsabers on them, the actual tubing. It's just not even in the same league as these. And so why wouldn't Disney make it possible to have this be done again? And my only, conclusion is that maybe it's because they don't want it to compete with their legacy collectibles, even though the price point would be maybe completely different. and because maybe it is available, but the fee is just astronomical, and there's no company who's willing to take that gamble to do it. So that's my piece on master replicas. So let's get into this itself. We're going to start by simply turning the case in a circle so you can appreciate it, and I'll take it out. So this is the way we're supposed to display it. You can see the lightsaber perfectly level in the 2 feet. That's what I'm going to call it. That holds it. And then you have the 2 silver plaques with the signatures in the middle on either side. And then of course you have the mirrored base and the clear acrylic cover. And if we just simply twirl it around, you can see it from the back as well. And then you can clearly see the mirror base. We're just going to move it around a little bit so you can see it in all its glory. So this is how it's going to be displayed, whether you want to put it in another display case or on a mantelpiece. This is the way it's meant to look. Okay. These are pretty fragile, you know, and I don't want to throw, again, master replicas any shade, because normally, you know, for these pop replicas, both before MR and since, you know, you're on your own, man. It's like, you know, they're going to give you the lightsaber and you figure out how to display it. Again, master replicas went above and beyond, where with every single collectible, whether it's a thermal detonator or like a helmet, they would also spend the money and also give you the base and the acrylic cover. That is so classy, and it costs so much more money, you know, to do it. But they did it for the collectors. And so certainly not going to throw shade there, but they are very delicate. And sometimes the packaging, you know, wasn't quite good enough to prevent damage. They got better as time passed, but you'll often have acrylic cases with cracks. You'll have a broken mirror base. And this is very, very common, you know. So to get one, not only do you want to have the lightsaber itself in good condition, but to have the actual intact base and acrylic cover without damage, that's a whole different ball game, you know. So again, that's all part of the value, right? Like, you're not paying $3,000 and change just for, let's just say, the lightsaber, but you're paying for everything, because everything makes a difference. You're paying for the signatures, you're paying for the packaging, the original box, all of those things. And if you don't have those things, then to be fair, it should bring the value down. Okay, so I'm now going to take out the acrylic cover. We're going to put it aside. And now, before getting into the actual lightsaber, we'll look at the plaques. Now, I'm going to move this back so we have a little bit of time, a little bit of, not time, but a little bit of space to maneuver. So it does also come with this paperwork right here. So it's sealed. You're going to open this up. And it comes with this very, very classy certificate of authenticity. You can see it's signature edition. By the way, the box that the lightsaber comes in also says signature edition on the box to differentiate it from the limited edition. So these are all things where you can't just mix and match. So in the center, I put some of the extra paperwork, not quite as important. This is the original postcard to join their Master Replicas Collector Society. And if you join, then there are a couple of exclusive pieces that only Collectors Society members are allowed to join. So that's pretty cool. Of course, I never got into that, but if you look at some of the original benefits, you get a personalized card, you get a pin, access to lower series numbered limited edition replicas, early access to web exclusive collectibles. So, you know, pretty nice stuff, okay? So this is a special invitation. And then you have this sort of seal and then this little paper to protect this seal. I don't know what this is exactly supposed to be, but if it's a truly, like, you know, brand new mint in box piece, it'll have this as well, even though it's not that important. It'll have the invitation as well. But the thing that's critical is this this little black little booklet. And here, of course, you can pause and read yourself what is said. This is the actual seal, certificate of authenticity. It's very, very classy. And you can actually see, of course, Mr. Jones and Mr. Prowse actually signing it. So this is really, really nice to have. You can see you have a little bit of the foam still attached to it. You can all do the information right here. And look at when this was produced in 2002. So that is 21 years ago. Over 20 years was when they made this signature edition lightsaber. So just kind of pretty, awesome, and also a little bit like, humbling that I'm holding in my hands, or we're holding our hands replicas that are now over 20 years old. So, of course, it comes with this. Put this aside. Now let's take a look at the plaques. So this is the only lightsaber, I believe, in fact, the only collectible that has actually a double plaque, a dual plaque. Most pieces only have one signature. You'll find when I do my review for the Empire Strikes Back lightsaber that only has Mr. James Earl Jones' signature, and then the Return of the Jedi only has Mr. David Prowse's signature. And so a few things to note. When you open up the lightsaber box, you're gonna have this, kind of weird leg. It's in clear acrylic, and it has this adhesive on the front part of it. And if you peel the backing off of this adhesive, or not the backing, but the front off, the material is like super sticky. And if you touch it, it just sticks, it bonds almost instantly, and you can't move it. And these plaques are packaged separately and wrapped in tissue paper. They're made out of some sort of silver, I think. And if you take a look, you can see that this is already somewhat tarnished. There's fingerprints on it. It's just like extremely easy to get stuff on it. I've never, by the way, ever seen a version of this. And look how reflective it is. You can actually see me and my camera if you look in the reflection sitting there. So I've never seen one like this that's like pristine, actual silver, shiny. I've never seen it. This actually is pretty darn good. I talked to the seller, and he was not the original owner of this piece. He bought it from another owner, but that guy was the original owner, and it was never displayed. Okay, and so this was actually never, it was actually never, the peeling was never taken off. This was never actually stuck on, and so being that this plaque was always kept in its box, it still oxidizes. You see that? It still oxidizes. But this is better than a lot of other ones I've seen. And you can see maybe under the light, various little fingerprints and things like that. And for all we know, this could be the fingerprint of like James Earl Jones. You know what I'm saying? Because he had to actually touch it to sign it. So it's a great idea. It's definitely very, very classy. But the problem is being silver, even if you're not touching it, it just tarnishes and oxidizes over time. And remember, this is 20 years old. And my Empire Strikes Back one looks horrible. It's just like got black oxidation marks all throughout. And when Master Replicas saw that that's what was happening, they actually immediately changed to another signature plaque. And I'll show you that with the Return of the Jedi Vader Signature Edition. So these like silver plaques are actually very, very rare because of that. I think they only did it with the Empire Strikes Back and the New Hope signature plaques. Maybe there was a Luke one here or there, but they switched rapidly to the non-metal ones once they figured out the problem with the tarnishing. Okay, so it was a little bit nervous, like just slapping this on, and not trying to completely screw it up. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. You'll see that with the Empire Strikes Back, I actually did screw it up, but I just have to live with that. It's okay. I guess worst comes to worst, you could tear this off by force and then just super glue it back in a better position, but I don't care enough to do that for my Empire Strikes Back. Although some will say I should have. I did a much better job with these guys because even 10 years later, I remember how I screwed up the Empire Strikes Back version, and I learned from my lesson. So here you'll see it's Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope, Darth Vader lightsaber, and then David Prowse, Signature Edition, 673/1000. You see the Master Replicas logo and Lucasfilm logo. This is really, really nice and really, really classy, okay? And so if you do have actually tarnished signature plaques, there is a way of actually polishing it out. It's a type of polish that you use for like high-end automobiles and high-end cars, right? High-end cars. And you are supposed to just use a little tiny touch of it. You can actually mask off the signature with clear Scotch tape to protect the signature. And you can buff all of that oxidation out and make it look really, really good. There is a thread on the rebelscum.com forums that show you how to do it. There are, of course, a couple of caveats. It's a little bit nervous because this stuff is so rare that after a certain point, new collectors just never got their hands on one. And so there's a couple of points of concern. One is obviously if you protect the signature with Scotch tape, will the tape actually take off any of the permanent marker? We've been assured by the people on that thread and by people who've done it that that's not the case. That's not going to happen. But that hasn't been done recently. Permanent marker does get, who knows what happens over time. This is, again, we're talking now of about 20 plus year collectibles. And of course, the other question is, does it damage some of the lettering here, the etching, if you polish it out? So this is a source of some concern, but we'll see. I like these plaques well enough. I'm not really going to polish them. I think they're pretty good. They're good enough for me, but my Empire Strikes Back one, which you're going to see when I review that shortly in an upcoming video, is just terrible. So there really isn't anything to lose by polishing that. I do plan on doing that. I have the polishing glaze already coming in. So let's go a little bit closer here. This is the actual base itself. So if you look, I'm gonna go real close, you can see the, I'm gonna just move the whole thing. You can actually see the mirror base. It's pretty classy. So you can see the reflection. There's a lot of situations where, for instance, the wood here is chipped, the mirror is cracked. There's a little bit of smudge here on the mirror, but not horribly so. And again, that's why I asked whether the guy I bought it from was the original owner, because it looked like it was actually mint from the box, never touched. But there was a few smudge marks here or there, so I suspected that maybe, it had at least been somewhat inspected or touched. But intact mirror, these are the legs that hold the lightsaber. So I'm gonna lift it gently up. So now this is the actual signature edition lightsaber. It's all made out of machined metal. There's no real plastic or anything like that. And this is, very accurate to the prop used in the movie. They actually scanned it in. Again, for 20 years, it's pretty amazing. So in case you guys were not aware, there's a lot of information on YouTube if you wanted to get into the history of these lightsabers. They were all made essentially from the flash guns of old style cameras. And then they were obviously modified to give it its sort of science fiction look. So, you know, there's the D-ring that you can use to hang the lightsaber onto the belt. This thing actually moves. There's the big screw right here. There's these little smaller screws that actually come out here and here. Actually, when I got it, miraculously, oddly, this screw here was actually not in position. It had actually come out somehow during the shipment here and was actually in the case. And I found it and then just gently put it in and screwed it. The screws weren't stripped. It's perfectly good condition. I just have no idea how it jostled itself out or how I did it. So it just goes to show you that there is a lot of impact when you're shipping these things. It can happen, but you know, luckily no damage. We found the screw, we screwed it back in. No harm, no foul. You can see the clasp right here. This is all from the camera, the flash gun. And then this part here, which is the bubble, is apparently from some sort of calculator. This was a nail that was nailed through to keep this in place, and then they kind of modified it. So this is actually a bent nail. Sometimes, you know, it loses a little bit of its majesty, right? Its mystique when you find out exactly what went into these movies in the 70s when they're just making these props, because back then the budget was not very high. And so you're obviously just sort of doing what you can to, you know, get things done. This was so brand new, it was still in its like shrink wrap, and it even had the made in China sticker still on here. So again, I want to take a look here just so you guys you can take a look at the mirror finish. You can actually see the reflection of the tripod and the iPhone camera. That's how shiny it is. Just kind of getting a look at all the detail, the beautiful detail of how they put it all together. You can see the emitter up here. And then the T-track. This is made out of some sort of rubber material. It's very sticky, and it tends to accumulate just particles of dust even in the air very easily. And then we're going to turn it around. You can see this is what it looks like from this angle right here. And so this lightsaber, again, is almost identical to the limited edition lightsaber. I would say it is identical. But the situation is, you might be thinking, well, is there a way then to, you know, because again, so many of these got broken up over time because of, you know, mishaps. Would it be possible, for instance, to get a, you know, signature plaque like this and then just buy a limited edition lightsaber and just sort of, you know, kind of Frankenstein a set together? Because people have tried that in the past. And the answer is it can, but it'll never be the same, because when you look at the hilt over here, you can see that not only does it say the date 2002 Master Replicas, but if you look at the bottom, what does it say here? It does actually have engraved in it signature edition, okay? And so a limited edition will not have this here. And at some point, they were even considering engraving the number into the hilt as well, but that was never done. And so you can't actually, believe it or not, mix and match. That's what makes this lightsaber uniquely a signature edition, okay? And that's why I try to handle this with only gloves, because I don't know what the sweat and the oil is going to do to this rubber. It's always very sticky. This is unfortunately just one of these things that happens. With age, as the rubber degenerates, it gets less sticky, but this is like literally almost brand new. And so it's pretty sticky. And you know, this is kind of what it feels like. It's very, very heavy, actually, okay? Very, very heavy, and there's just a real heft to it. When you, you know, hold this lightsaber hilt in your hand, I'm gonna lift this up. You know, when you hold this in your hand, you really do feel, to a very small extent, you really do feel what maybe, you know, Vader or Luke would feel with this thing in their hand. So it's a pretty remarkable feeling. It's an amazing feeling holding it. And this would be the case even if, you know, you were to hold a limited edition versus a signature edition. So I just wanted to put that out there. Obviously, this is something impossible to convey in a video review. But yeah, there is definitely a sense of weight to this that adds to, you know, the experience, right, of handling this. I told you before that these things are so beautiful that when people actually come and visit and they don't know, they'll actually ask whether this is a working lightsaber. The question, if you just, you know, obviously stop to even think about it for a little bit, is, you know, it's ridiculous. But that's how beautiful these are, that for a little, just a very small split second, you know, you are suspending disbelief. You know, disbelief is suspended, and a little part of your brain is thinking to herself, is this a real lightsaber because it looks so good? So I'm kind of showing you the different angles so you can appreciate, again, you know, the bent nail, and then they put something over it to hide the fact there's nothing but a bent nail. When they lost the original one, the big screws here, the little tiny screws in there, the D-ring. Just, you know, a remarkable piece of movie history. Only 1,000 of these. And you're probably thinking, like, you know, like 1,000 is not very limited. I mean, the statue world, 1,000 is a lot, right? But again, you have to keep in mind that this is Star Wars, and there are a lot of Star Wars fans out there. And you know, 1,000 is still pretty limited. And this is sort of the daddy of them all, right? This is the lightsaber of Darth Vader when he was first introduced in Star Wars New Hope, right? So there you go. I mean, it's a pretty simple, again, lightsaber, simple design. You get to see all of the details here. And it just comes from an MPP flash gun. This is, I think, a 3-cell from Britain was the one that they used for Vader's lightsaber. But it became an icon of movie history. So for those of you who don't know or have only ever held the legacy versions of these, now you know what the Holy Grail is. All right. So I'm going to very gently place it on here. Now here's the interesting thing. When I took delivery of this and opened it up, this leg was actually off of the base. The impact from the shipping had actually knocked it off. And the reason is because in a lot of times for the base, just to show you, sometimes, you know, they will actually have cut grooves in the base to sink these legs in so it doesn't wobble or move. And for whatever reason, Master Replicas didn't do that. Maybe, again, it was just so new that, you know, they were pioneers. And so they didn't know what was the best way of doing it, but they didn't have a groove inset in here. It was literally just glued. You can imagine over 20 years, even super glue gets a little bit, you know, dry, not quite as good, and the impact actually knocked this thing out. So luckily, it wasn't so well attached that it cracked. I mean, I guess you can argue that if it was, you know, inset deep, maybe it wouldn't have come free in the first place. But if the impact is great enough, you would actually crack it, or you can crack the base. And so luckily for me, when it came, actually only this part was off, and it was just very simple to just, you know, line it up again and then glue it and put it in. As you can see, it's very, very firm now. If you were to look on the other side, you can see the same glue marks at the very bottom showing that that's how they actually attached both. But, you know, hopefully we'll see that. But yeah, that was the only other thing that went wrong. But, you know, you can imagine when you bought a $3,000 piece, you want everything to be perfect. So there was a little bit of there was a little bit of like, like, oh my God, is everything going to be okay when you first saw it? And then you kind of analyze that, oh, okay, that's fine. Similarly, when the screw was, you found this little screw and it's like, oh my God, is that something wrong? And then you find out, oh, it's nothing, you can just screw it back in. So luckily all of that is fine. This came in perfect condition. And you can see that the distance between the two legs are just wide enough that you can actually rotate, and the actual bent nail is not going to catch on the plastic legs at all, the acrylic legs at all. You can actually display it any number of ways you want. You can even do it with the bubble on top if you wish, sort of like that. But I tend to want to display it. It's kind of hard because you really want to display it like this. This is sort of the perfect way to do it with this, kind of lined up with a D-ring on top. But then you miss that really, really pretty, bent nail and the bubble. So I usually like to do it around like that so that you get to see a little bit of everything. Let me adjust the camera so we can see that. So I usually like to put it like that, and then I have the James Earl Jones signature right here on the left side, and then the David Prowse signature over here, I guess on the right, just like that. And then we put the acrylic cover all the way over very carefully like this. And this is how I plan to display it on my mantelpiece next to The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So that was like an hour review, but what else to expect when I've waited like 10 years to get something like this? A lot of emotions running through, and to be frank, the culmination actually wasn't all that easy because, I had to really work for it. I got it, I think, for a very fair price. Had to trust, take a leap of faith, and then to finally get it, and to have to see the one acrylic leg that had come off the glue, and then to find the screw and wonder if that was something broken on the lightsaber itself. So there was definitely a few moments where there was a little bit of a increased heart rate, but luckily none of that was bad. It was all perfect, very easily fixed. Screw went in completely fine. The threads took, and it was a very easy fix to just simply glue it back to where it was originally glued in the first place. There wasn't even any break in the mirror. But definitely this is the most expensive collectible prop, one of the most expensive I've ever spent for just one thing, compared to its original price. I think the MSRP was $5.99. I asked the gentleman I bought it from, but that was $5.99. He doesn't remember, but he believes it's $5.99, not including the display case and the acrylic. I think with that, it might have been maybe an extra $100 or so. See what I'm talking about with the whole confusion between, collectibles, like when you have too many different branches and different choices. But back then, that's what it was about. They were trying to give a little bit something for everybody, so to speak. So you can imagine that its official price was, its retail price back in 2002 was about $600. And in 20 years, that's increased in value quintuple, 5 times value, even 6 to 7 times value, depending. And, sadly, Mr. David Prowse passed away recently. And Mr. James Earl Jones has reached an advanced age. I think he's almost 90, if not already there. And he just this year made really big waves in the Star Wars community, where he basically gave up voicing Vader. He's essentially retired from that. So these are giants in the world of Star Wars collecting, memorabilia. They mean a lot to us. And so it's sort of the end of an age. And so these signatures are going to get, in my opinion, more and more valuable with time, because they're getting older. They're getting older and passing. So that's all I have to say about my signature edition. But before I end this video, I'm going to actually also show you my limited edition lightsaber. So we're going to move things back a little bit more so that hopefully we can get in a little bit more shot. So there you have it right over here. So this is the limited edition. This is the non-signature version. And I like to start with the display cabinet, or the display case, where one of the things is that you can immediately tell is that while the base is, I think, identical, the acrylic is way shorter than the signature edition. And the reason for that, of course, is that the signature edition has to have enough verticality to accommodate the signature plaques. And since you don't have that for the limited edition, then in fact, all you have is the plaque right in the front. You don't need that. And so I'm gonna take a look here. You can see that this is just simply a lot shorter than the actual signature version. In fact, if I put it right next to it, you can see that it's actually quite a bit shorter. I mean, I know that this is not resting in the base, but even if it was resting in the base, there would be this difference. Okay, so number one, you can see that there is that difference there. Now, the second difference is because there is no display, there's no signature card, the actual plaque is glued to both feet. One of the ramifications of that happening is that the feet tend to be quite a bit more stable, because now you have this extra, piece of acrylic reinforcing it. And so they tend to not actually come off. And here you can see that it's Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope, the Lucasfilm and Master Replicas, but this is not actually silver, so it doesn't tarnish. It's just a little bit dusty. And you can see that this is a limited edition, 3,379 out of 7,500. So can you imagine that? They made 7,500 of these non-signature lightsabers. And you're probably thinking to yourself, 7,500, how can that even be considered limited? Did they ever make all 7,500? I don't know. Maybe somebody out there with more knowledge will be able to tell me. But that's a huge number of lightsabers. And even then, one of these guys, back then they were selling for a couple $100, but like today, I'm looking at prices anywhere from, I think, 700 to 1,000. I think if you can get it for lower than 700, you're getting a really, really good deal. It all depends again on what you've got. Do you have the mirrored base? Do you have the official plaque? Do you have the case? Do you have the original packaging? What's the quality and the, how well is the original lightsaber, is it well kept? There's a lot of variation, in quality. But it's kind of shocking that even at 7,500, they're still going for, easily $500 for like a non-perfect, incomplete. And if it's a brand new in box, you're looking at anywhere from 1,000 on up, right? 1,100, 1,000. So if you look at this lightsaber, you can see that it's basically identical. I mean, I'm going to show this to you again. It's essentially identical to the signature edition. The materials are exactly the same. You can see here the bubble, the bent nail, all of it's done. Now this is a little bit smudgy. I didn't polish it with my microfiber cloth like I did with the signature version. But I just wanted to show you again up close that this is basically the same, right? The red S, everything is identical. You can see the little screws here. So if you're missing any parts from the signature edition, you could get one of these and bastardize those parts. Luckily, we didn't need to do that. But again, you can see here the sort of almost like a flocking type, this sort of rough surface, and that lightsaber on the dual signature one on eBay that he was trying to sell, it had chips, man. There was like a chip here, there's another big chip here, and that was really heartbreaking. You can imagine seeing like such an amazing, work of art, such an amazing piece of movie history, a prop replica of that expense, and to have it be chipped, it looked like it had fallen or just, that was really tough to see. I wish him the best, but he increased the price from 3,000 to 4,000 buy it now. And it's like, I'm sorry, but the 4,000, you're gonna have to wait many, many years before it even gets to that, because you have a damaged lightsaber and a completely destroyed case and bad mirror base, incomplete packaging. Like I said, that's gonna be a problem. But here you can see that this D-ring actually moves, right? The screws actually come out. So all of this, again, is just really, really cool, showing you the quality and the weight. In terms of my T-tracks, again, this is rubber. I've handled this a little bit more. And so you can see that it's got a little bit more dust accumulated on it. And there's a bit more kind of wear and tear of these rubber grips. There's a little bit more, you can see here, there's a little bit of, I don't know if that's damage or just scratches, but it's like rubber. The rubber is sort of wearing off a little bit. I think with a little bit of cleaning, I can make it nice, but I don't want to kind of, mess with this rubber grip any more than necessary. And this one, by the way, is just not really sticky at all. Okay, I'm holding it, it's not sticky at all. And over time, it does lose a little bit of that stickiness. The signature version, is still very, very sticky. And finally, if you look at the hilt, I'm gonna focus it, you can see that while it says Lucasfilm Ltd, and you can see Master Replicas 2002, it doesn't have the signature edition on the hilt. And all the signature editions have that signature edition over here. So that will distinguish, that's the only thing actually that distinguishes a limited edition lightsaber from a signature edition lightsaber. All right, so hopefully that does give you a little bit of nice information about the differences between the limited edition and the signature edition. And if you were to look here, you can see that it still just barely has enough clearance to rotate it pretty easily all the way along. When you put this in position, it just gives you enough clearance to slide this right out, and it has enough in the middle as well. So there you have that. I'm going to put the case back on. So now you see the difference. So in actuality, when I was actually looking for the damaged signature edition, I was actually thinking about that guy Ranch. I was going to actually just maybe get a better deal, buy the dual signature version from him, and then just use the case for my limited edition and just not even deal with the case that he has, because it was just so terrible. But now that I have both, I can see that that wouldn't have worked, because I wouldn't have been able to put the signature plaques in the display case. And of course, this would always be here. You would have to rip that apart. So no, actually, even the display case is specific to whether it's a signature edition or limited edition. They actually have their own unique cases and display of the plaques. You can't mix and match. So there you have it. A part of me is like, I guess a little bit, maybe even in disbelief that I did this because, when I got it, it was almost like brand new in packaging. I mean, it had been opened, of course, to verify damage and make sure there was none of that. But essentially, it was like brand new. And I was like, well, if I'm going to spend this much, I didn't spend the money to keep it in its brown box for another 10 years and to sell it for even more profit. I bought it to enjoy and to put aside, to put it next to my, the rest of my Vader lightsabers. So I actually, did the whole shebang. I mean, I took off the Made in China sticker, I threw it away. I took out the silver, plaques. I took out the tissue paper around it. I did it with gloves, of course, but I still did it. I peeled, the little backing off of the sticker. I applied it. So this is no longer mint in box. It's forever opened, and I couldn't be happier with that. And so now I have, of course, 2 versions of this, and I'm gonna have to decide what to do with this. And I think I'll just put it on sale and see what I can get for it. I have to check my storage garage, but I believe I actually still have the brown shipper for this. And I still have, I think, the certificate of authenticity and all that. This is a pretty good set. Again, the grip has a little bit of wear and tear, but otherwise there's no damage to this lightsaber at all. It's not brand new in box, but it has everything. It's got a number, good acrylic case and mirror base with no damage. So again, I'm pretty happy with that. But this is the one that I finally got that's here to stay. So this is one of my longer reviews, but again, it's 10 years of sort of history behind it, a lot to talk about with master replicas, with the plaques and the signatures and all of that. So there you have it. I hope you somewhat enjoyed that. And now that I'm doing this, I'm going to take my time, and in short order, I will also put up my Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi Master Replica Signature Edition Vader sabers. And then I'll have one final one where I'm actually going to look at all 4 Vader lightsabers from Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope all the way through Empire and Return of the Jedi, so you can kind of see the evolution of the props and the design of these sabers. I think that'll be really, really interesting, and we'll go through that. So again, until next time, do take care.